Bill, you ready to go?
Absolutely, Chris.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody to our Game Ready webinar. We've titled it Preventing Throwing Injuries. My name is Chris Knobloch from BaseballSoftballUK. I'm the broadcaster and public relations officer for the company. It's great to have such a well-attended webinar this evening. This is our most attended webinar that we've done as part of this Game Ready series so far. If you are interested in any of our further webinars or any more information that we're doing during the COVID-19 pandemic, all of our information is available at baseballsoftballuk.com/gameready. We will post video of this webinar as well as our other webinars there sometime tomorrow. It'll also be on our social media. I'll show you those slides, later on. We are very lucky to be joined today by Bill Holmberg. Bill is the MLB pitching coordinator for Europe and Africa. He's a previous international scout for the Chicago Cubs. He also worked for the MLB Italian Academy for 14 years and is the pitching coach for the Italian national team. We are very, very lucky to have him here today. He was a speaker at the 2019 Coach Summit run by Baseball Softball UK in Milton Keynes. We were lucky enough to have him during the London series as well for a number of MLB related events, the coach development program, the cadet camp, and the elite tournament last year, actually this week last year, in lead up to the MLB London series. So we're very excited to have Bill here tonight. If you have any questions during the presentation, the chat window is available. You can type your questions there and we'll ask them as they come up. Otherwise, you can use the hand raising feature, which is in the bar on your Zoom window, and you can just raise your hand and we will get to those questions. Although we will also have a brief question and answer session at the end of the webinar. That's it for me. I love the sound of my own voice. As a broadcaster, that's what I do. But it's time to turn it over to the person who actually knows what they're talking about, and that is Bill Holmberg. So Bill, take it away.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm very happy to be here. I've done this a couple times for the BSUK, and I'm always really happy to be able to give a little bit of the knowledge that I've accumulated over the 40 odd years that I've been involved in baseball. This is something, this presentation tonight is something that's very close to my heart as a pitching coach, specifically, but more as a throwing coach first. I don't consider myself a pitching coach per se. I consider myself first a throwing coach because I think that in our game today, especially when we're talking about Europe and some of the other non-playing baseball countries where baseball isn't a major sport, we need to make sure that we protect our inventory. When I say protect our inventory, I mean we can't have players getting hurt. And a lot of the information that I'm going to give tonight is based on young players and also junior players and also senior players. So it sort of covers the whole gamut of the baseball players that we're going to be involved with. And also, let me add one other thing is it's just the mechanics and what we're talking about on the arm injuries transfers over to softball in the same way. So we're talking about baseball and softball tonight. Anytime we have an implement, which in our case is a baseball, it could be a spiking a volleyball, it could be a javelin. We're always going to be talking more or less about the same possible problems that we could have throwing that implement. So kicking everything off, we're looking at the first page. We talk about the arm action and body action basically as causing injuries. We're going to first go through the arm action, possible arm action injuries. And the first UCL on the top is the ulnar collateral ligament. Now, many of you people might have heard of the Tommy John surgery that is very prevalent nowadays in MLB with most of our pitchers. And actually, to be honest with you, a lot of catchers are having and infielders are having the same problems because of the position that their arm is in when their front foot hits the ground. So these are problems that me as a pitching coach and as a throwing coach, I'm trying to eliminate because the larger inventory, the more players I have that are available for me, the better chance I have of developing a positive team and a team that's going to have success over the long term. Okay. The second item there on our list there of the injuries caused by arm action are the gleno-humeral ligaments. Now, those are ligaments that hold the humeral head into the fossa. So basically, what you have are more or less something like similar to rubber bands that are holding the humeral head into the fossa, which is right here. Okay. The rotator cuff injuries, I'm sure that a lot of you have already heard of the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is it's for muscles actually that hold the humeral head into its fossa together with the gleno-humeral ligaments. Okay, then we have the growth plates. Let me say one thing about the growth plates. When we're talking about young pitchers and young throwers, the growth plates are fundamental, because what could happen with growth plates is you might have an early developer that might actually be chronologically 12 years old, but physiologically 15 years old. Whereas on the other hand, you might have a late mature that might be 12 years old, but chronologically, but physiologically might only be 9 or 10. So there's a huge, huge importance that we want to place on the growth plates, because we have to be able to identify where our players are in the growth phase and be able to make sure that we protect those players from getting possible arm injuries. And as you all know, if you're involved with coaching, or if you do play baseball, or you do throw a baseball or a softball, you do know that that arm injuries are very prevalent, especially with the young players. So we don't want to damage those growth plates. We don't want to have them actually stunt the growth of their arms, so that we end up having problems further down the road. Bone chips basically are the cartilage in the elbow, in the olecrayon process area, which is in the elbow, that those have a tendency to chip off and sometimes interfere with the movement of the arm and the elbow, the ulnar bone and the radial bone. Extension and flexion of the elbow. Now, this is a very common problem with especially older pitchers. We'll see guys that can't extend their arm completely, and the angle of their arm will be greatly reduced from 0. So they don't have extension, nor do they have flexion of their elbows. So this is another thing that is extremely important, especially if we want to have these players reach our maximum potential. So being that if we start losing extension and flexion, that's where we're going to have big problems with possible arm injuries, velocity, and also the ability to be able to manipulate the ball, which is throwing off-speed pitches or balls that move. So those are the 6 primary injuries caused by arm action. Could you switch, please, Chris? Now, we're going to look at the ulnar collateral ligament first, because this is the most prevalent arm injury that we find in Major League Baseball's pitchers right now. We probably have more or less, I think the last statistic I saw, there were about 45 to 50% of the Major League pitchers have had this injury previously. Now, some pitchers have had it more than once. Some pitchers have had it more than twice. So this is an injury where we have the player is really basically shut down for between 12 and 18 months. So we have to be really, really careful about this. This is one of the biggest, and people might say, yeah, well, I've heard people say, well, they come back from Tommy John throwing harder than they did before. But actually, we don't want to lose a player for that amount of time, number one. And number two, the reason that they throw harder after being away from the game for 18 months is because they've never gone through the protocols that they've had to go, or they do go through to come back from Tommy John surgery. So as you can see, and it's going to be extremely important to keep a nice eye on especially the bottom left photo. You see the humeral bone, which is what I was talking about. The humeral head goes up into the shoulder fossa. Then you'll see the tricep tendon there. We got to make sure we remember that. Then you have the olecranon process on the bottom. And then we have the actual ulnar collateral ligament. So basically it's a little ligament that, like a cross piece, looks a little bit like a square, and it holds the ulna and the radius into the humeral bone there in the fossa. Okay, so but those pieces there, those different examples, for example, the tricep tendon, we got to remember that, because that's going to be one of the problems that we find when we do have side-to-side throwing. So remember that specific. It's going to be that specific diagnosis. So you see the ligament structure there. It's pretty common. I mean, it's not a very intricate type situation. That's why it's really, really easy. Well, not really easy, but somewhat easy to come back from this injury, because we've gotten so good at the surgery itself and the rehab that most pitchers come back and are able to throw as hard as they did before, if not a little bit harder. So we have the second, number 2 is a Tommy John surgery. That's what the surgery is called, named after a pitcher who pitched for the Chicago White Sox and the New York Yankees, and I think the Los Angeles Angels too, Tommy John, and the Dodgers too, I think. Tommy was the first one who went through this surgery, and he came back and ended up having a long career. I think he threw for 12 years after the surgery. Basically, the explanation of the surgery is very simple. We take a tendon out of the left hand if you're a right-handed thrower, and you can see that tendon when you push your pinky and thumb together. It pops right out here. They will remove that. They will take it out. They will overlap it onto the ligament, okay? And that will be the extent of the surgery. So as I said, it takes 18 months most of the time to come back. For pitchers, position players, a little bit shorter. Okay, Chris. Now we get to a little bit more specific about the causes. So again, with young players, I want to make sure that you coaches out there and the players out there understand the importance of getting your arm above your shoulder when you get to front foot strike, okay? The elbow below 0 degrees, when I say 0 degrees, I mean about this position right here, okay? The hand should be above 0 degrees when my front foot strikes, okay? So you look, for example, I think the top example is Severino, and he's just about above 0 degrees, and on Syndergaard on the bottom is almost getting the heel strike, and he's still below his shoulder level. So if you guys know anything about Syndergaard, he did have Tommy John surgery this year, okay? And I think Severino did also. So the time frame for this is short to medium. Short to medium, what does that mean? It means it's going to be a shorter time frame than another injury, which could be the labrum, or it could be another type of, or the gleno-humeral ligaments. This is really a very quick injury if the pitcher is throwing a lot of innings. We also find this to be the case in young pitchers. We're seeing more and more Tommy John surgery on young pitchers, which is really absolutely a shame, because it's something that's relatively easy to control and to guard against. Okay, what happens is we have gradual micro tears of the ulnar collateral ligament over time. It's never a one-pitch occurrence. Now, people think that it's a one-pitch occurrence because they feel it pop after one pitch, but in actuality, there's been a partial a tear over time. You get micro tears slowly into the ligament, and that in itself gradually starts to reduce the efficiency of the ligament, and then you have the partial tear or complete tear of the ulnar collateral ligament. Now, one thing I want to talk about is late forearm turnover. I call it late forearm turnover because basically if I'm at 0 degrees or below 0 degrees, when my front heel strikes, then I have to turn this over quickly to be able to throw the ball. So that is basically what we're trying to do, is trying to evade, if possible, is being below 0 degrees. So I want to possibly be up in a good launch position, good drive line position when I get to front foot strike. Because if I'm late, that's when I'm going to start putting more stress on my elbow. Okay? Okay, Chris. Now, the gleno-humeral ligaments, these are the ligaments we talked about that hold the humeral head into its fossa. Now, the fossa in the shoulder is extremely shallow. Okay, it's not a very deep fossa like the hip would be. Okay, it's very shallow fossa, and the humeral head moves around inside of that fossa. Now, if you lengthen the gleno-humeral ligaments, okay, it's not like the gleno-humeral ligaments will bounce back to their original position. Once they've been lengthened, they stay lengthened. So we got to be really careful with this. And a lot of problems with what we see on pitchers. Chris Sale just had Tommy John surgery, so it's not really, he didn't really have any problems with his gleno-humeral ligaments. Bumgardner has had some problems with his shoulder, okay? And some of the other pitchers there have had shoulder problems. So basically the cause of this injury is taking the upper pitching arm, which is a humeral bone, behind the acromial line. Think of the acromial line as the 2 shoulder points, okay? And we take that elbow behind. So we don't want to be in this position because we're forcing the humeral head out of its fossa. So that's what happens many times is you have labrum problems, you have gleno-humeral ligament stretching because that humeral head does go out of its fossa. So we want to keep that humeral head inside the fossa so we don't have any possible injuries coming out from that. So now the time frame on this injury is medium to long term. Why is it medium to long term? Because it takes time for this to develop in a pitcher. Okay, you normally see major league pitchers having this problem at about 30 years old after they put in 200 innings a year for 4 or 5 years. This is a very, very easy fix from my perspective as a throwing coach, because for me, a lot of times, and as we see Chris Sale, he's been very successful, so has Bumgardner. But what they do to try to cover this, going behind their acromial line with their elbow, is then they come back, they try to lead a little bit with their elbow going forward, okay, showing their tricep to the catcher and actually having their elbow a little bit in front of their head. So they get to this position right here instead of being in external rotation back here. Okay, so usually what happens is you see it, we've seen it in Bumgardner, we saw a little bit in Chris Sale last year and the year before. They get a gradual loss of velo and control, okay, because they lose leverage. What happens is when you get those ligaments that stretch, and we'll see, I think, a picture later on of this, we get those ligaments stretching, and the humeral head loses leverage. And that's when we start to have it bouncing around and losing leverage. It's going to be losing velo, and it's going to be also losing command of our pitches, excuse me. Okay, so what this creates also is side-to-side arm action. This, for me, side-to-side arm action is one of the primary causes of injury. Okay, it could be shoulder injury, could be elbow injury, but it's a lot of times this is one of the main reasons why we do have arm injuries. So what we're trying to do in all of our mechanics and everything that we do when we're teaching our kids to throw with the MLB throwing program, for example, or the program that we're using with MLB for Europe and Africa, is we're trying to go from back to front instead of from side to side. Okay, so that's one of the things we have to remember as coaches. Okay, we're going to try to go from back to front, okay, instead of going from side to side. So think of it as going from north to south instead of east to west, okay, more or less. Okay, Chris? Now, rotator cuff and labrum, okay? This, a lot of times we saw a lot of, in the past, big league pitchers have had this, and especially in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s, we had a lot of rotator cuff problems, okay? Rotator cuff problems because of the way the pitchers use our arms. We can't use our arms in the wrong way, because if we do, that's where we're going to put ourselves in a bad position. If you look on the right corner, you'll see a pitcher for the Red Sox that is in extreme external rotation. Now, external rotation in this position right here, he's putting that shoulder and the labrum and the rotator cuff under a lot of stress. You'll see the same thing in the I don't know why we have all Red Sox pitchers here, but we'll see the same thing in the middle one, right underneath the glenoid fossa there. And then we also have one of the pitchers on the left that is extremely side to side. Now, the pitcher on the left-hand side, and we're going to look at this later, this is basically, I call it forearm fly out. So what we do is we're throwing our hand out and using the centrifugal force to rotate, okay? And we're throwing our hand away from our body. We don't want to keep throwing our hand away from our body. We want to make sure that we get our elbow in, tuck it in instead of being out here, okay? That is a misuse of our arm on the left bottom, okay? And as we see, we're starting to see the pitcher on the top right who still has his elbow or up and his hand is way below 0 degrees, and he's going forward already into his foot plant. So causes of rotator cuff and labrum basically are internal external rotation, arm behind the acromial line, and side to side finish. Remember that we want to make sure that we don't have side to side finish. That's fundamental, okay? Want to go from back to front, not side to side. Okay, Chris? Thank you. Growth plates and bone chips. Now, this is extremely important for young players. As I said before, we can really do some serious damage to young players by allowing them to have the bad arm action, which causes them to stunt their growth plates' ability to grow in their elbow and their shoulder. Now, the growth plates in your elbow normally for a normal maturer are closed when you're 16 years old. Whereas in the shoulder, we get closure usually, okay, at 19 years old. So we have to be really careful with young players, okay? And it's not always the number of throws, it's the way that the kids are using their arms. That's a fundamental problem with young throwers. They just get, our throwing program with MLB is very basically, we put a lot of emphasis on the way that we throw and not how much we throw. So it's more important to have proper arm action, proper body action to be able to repeat the same thing time after time than it is to be able to throw hard, okay? And to be able to throw a large quantity of throws, all right? So this is what I was talking about, the arm action, forearm flying away from the body during delivery and release, which means side to side. Again, I'm going to go side to side. I don't want to go side to side. I want to go back to front, okay? I want to go back to front, all right? Injuries, we can damage the growth plates, okay? We can have bone chips, which are basically chips of could be growth plates, could be cartilage, okay? Loss of extension and flexion of the elbow. This is one of the problems that we see. Now, when you have a kid that has side-to-side arm action, he's going to come up to you and tell you that he's got pain in his bicep, okay, front side shoulder, or back of his elbow, okay? Front side shoulder basically is going to be the teres major or the pec major, okay? That the front side is going to come out, so he's going to have a strain on the front side here with the pec major. The bicep is the only thing that holds the radial bone and into the fascia here. You're going to see it fly out, so you'll actually have that banging of the in the olecranon process of radius and ulnar bone. So that's basically what causes that problem in the elbow, because it starts to inflame the fossa. The fossa inflames the cartilage around there, and afterwards it starts to push on the insertion for the tricep tendon, okay? Now the injury is damage of the growth plates, loss of extension, tricep pain, and also, which is right near the elbow. You'll have your players coming up to you and telling you that they have bicep problems, front side shoulder problems, or backside. And if they do have those problems, the one thing that you need to do is make sure that they tuck their elbow in, keep it as close as they possibly can to their head, but don't allow their hand to fly out. No forearm fly out. We want to get the elbow in so we can throw the hand out and pronate properly until the end. Okay, so we talked about the arm action. Now we'll talk a little bit about the body action. Okay, some of the causes of body action injuries and problems are overstriding and negative rotation. Negative rotation is what you see in Chapman on the right-hand side. Too much negative rotation is putting a strain on the knee and on the hip. Okay, we're seeing the same thing from Fulmer in the middle, and then Jake Arrieta has an extreme stride length, which basically puts him in a position where he's doing the splits while he's delivering the ball. So we want to make sure our stride length will be more or less based on our height. Okay, it doesn't have to be. We don't want to overstride. We want to make sure that we have more or less between 60 and 80% of our standing height, and that would become our stride length. Okay, Chris. So, overstriding injuries. You can see the L5-S1 vertebrae, which is in the back. Some of you people might know that Clayton Kershaw has been injured for the last 2 or 3 years. And if you watch some of his mechanics, you'll see very easily that the reason why he has back problems is because he bends over at the end during his finish. So we want to try to stay as tall as possible, not to put too much stress on the L5-S1 vertebrae. Of course, we have these long strides, so we're going to have groin strains, we're going to have groin tears, we're going to have injuries to the oblique, glove side oblique, okay, which means basically if I'm a right-handed thrower, this is my glove side, I pull this down hard, okay, to make sure I can bring my back leg through, and that's going to cause me to have oblique injuries, which are like a 6 or 8 week DL stint, okay? And also at the end, we're going to have neck injuries, which we saw. Chris Archer just had surgery for a neck injury that he's had, and he's going to be out for 12 months. So looking at the top picture, we'll see Ohtani. Now look at where his foot strike is, his heel strike, his heel is down. See where his arm is in that position. Now, we all know that Ohtani last year did not pitch in the big leagues. He hit only. And one of the reasons why he did have Tommy John is very, very obvious in this picture. Okay. We have on the bottom right, Kerry Wood. He used to pitch for the Cubs, 20 strikeouts in a game. Okay. He's right near being at heel strike, and his hand is way below 0 degrees, okay? Charlie Morton is in a really good position right there. That's where we want to get our guys to be. His arm is about 0 degrees, but he's not quite at heel strike yet, okay? And then the middle picture, I think that's Castillo, and you see that he's a little bit more side to side, and what players have a tendency to do is to move their head to move their hip, okay? We want to be able to keep that head on line, rotate around it, and not use our head, the weight of our head, okay, to move our back foot forward, back hip forward, okay? All right, Chris. Okay, negative rotation injuries, again, we get problems with the meniscus in the knee, medial and lateral. Okay, we have problems with a hip labrum. As you know, nowadays we're getting a lot of players in all sports actually that are having hip problems. And we're gonna have our arm path behind our acromial line, which is going to create that side-to-side movement that we talked about, not wanting in our throwers, okay? So, sure, you got Chapman on the top. He throws more than 100 miles an hour. We have Pedro Martinez, who was a really successful starter. But talking about Chapman, the Reds were forced to put him in the bullpen because they tried to have Chapman start, and it turned out that he always had problems with the shoulder. So because of the overextension, you see his head pulling, the head pull, and just an exaggerated stride length, but he's a very powerful guy. But he couldn't start because of the mechanics that he has, but he is an extremely efficient reliever. So a lot of times you'll see that some of these guys that have bad mechanics, you can put them in the bullpen, okay? But other guys that have better mechanics, we want to try those guys as starters, okay? Chris? Okay, so basically, I want you guys to throw hard. I want my guys to throw as hard as possible. Obviously, we want them to throw strikes, but my main emphasis is to remain healthy. I want my pitchers and my throwers to remain healthy, because we can't get better if we're on the bench or if we're on the DL. So I work on throwing mechanics at all times. You'll see, in fact, our throwing program, I'll be happy to share that with Chris. The MLB throwing program, it's very specific to what we're trying to do to eliminate or reduce as much as possible our arm injuries and body injuries. So, Chris, that's about it for me. Perfect. And let's get to some questions if possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill. We will, thanks for sharing the throwing program as well. We will post that, if that's okay with you, on the Game Ready page on our website, which we have information for right here on the next slide. But if anyone has any questions, either use the hand raise function or you can unmute yourselves and ask. This is open questions for Bill about the throwing tutorial that he just gave, or if you have any questions that are similarly related, that would be fantastic.
Anything that's related to pitching and throwing is fine, Chris.
Fantastic.
I mean, I've seen most of it all over the course of my career. Yeah.
Sorry, Chris, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Bill. I'm Bruce Webb. I play here in England in AAA. I'm a pitcher myself. I've had some problems with my elbow for probably, probably about 3 years now. So I think I find myself in a position where I can throw, but I get quite sore and I need to stop. And it's definitely not as, I can probably throw as hard as I could before, but not as long. So I think that there is something wrong with my UCL, but I don't think it's completely gone. So, is there a specific way that I can, repair the UCL? Is it a thing or an injury that gets better over time?
Well, to be honest with you, it could be a lot of things. There's the UCL. If it's torn, you're probably going to have to live with that. But there are ways to be able to throw, minimizing the use of your UCL. There are two main reasons for UCL injuries. Number one, obviously, is what we talked about with the late forearm turnover. Another one is, and not too many people talk about, is early rotation in the top half. So if I'm rotating too early and I leave my arm extended in this position right here, I'm putting my elbow under a lot of stress. But to answer your question directly, if you want to send me some video, I'll be happy to look at it and tell you exactly what I think you need to do to be able to possibly reduce the stress on your UCL, or give you some pointers about mechanics. My email address, Chris, is whholmberg@gmail.com. If you want to send me some video, I'll be happy to look at it and give you guys some of my ideas. It won't take long. It takes a couple seconds to look at it and see where you guys, where you're at. So
I just put that in the chat for everyone. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Bill.
that's
very generous of you.
No problem. I've done that. I've done that with a lot of on all the webinars that we've done, and I've gotten some really good feedback from a lot of players and coaches. I hope that that it's helped them. I think it has. But if that young pitcher just wants to send me some video, you can take. Nowadays too. Another thing to mention is, nowadays with the iPhones and the new mobile phones that are just amazing, you can just take some film real quick, just put your camera down, boom, and then throw a pitch and then send it to me. So that shouldn't be too difficult.
I appreciate it, Bill. I'll get in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just drop me a line, give me some video. if you do have an iPhone, you can give me some slow-mo, that would be better. I'll put down a couple points and possibly give you an idea of some drills that you can use.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Great question, Bruce. And thanks again, Bill, for that offer. I know that's incredibly helpful. We've done a couple webinars for our slow pitch community, and the ability to review video has been just a game changer, to use the cliche. So that's I certainly encourage everybody who's signed up to take Bill up on that offer.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, and I'll answer you within a day or so. Obviously, I'm in the States now, so it's going to be there's a time difference. But sure, I'll be happy to give you a couple pointers, give you a couple ideas. And you know, Chris, sometimes we start to create this give and take of ideas, and especially with young players and coaches, that coaches might go out to the field and see some things with their players, and then come back and start thinking about what we talked about with the arm injuries, and possibly use my email address and use me as a sounding board to see if there's some way they can make their practice a little bit better, you know? So, yeah, it's, I'm open, whatever you guys, if anybody needs, just let me know and I'll be happy to give you my ideas.
Thanks so much, Bill. Any other questions? Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask.
Bill, sorry, it's Richard Evans from Bristol Baseball Club in the UK. We run a development team and we have lots of people learning to pitch. They want to pitch. Is there sort of do you have 5 top tips that we could sort of say to them, these are the basic sort of things you need to really concentrate on if you want to pitch? We do have coaches, but I just wondered if there was anything coming from you that would help them.
Yeah, you know, my biggest pet peeve is arm action. I see a lot of problems with young throwers because of the inefficient arm action, and that's and I think it'll be easier to tie a lot of this together if you look at our when I send our throwing program with some video. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's another webinar like this, and following our throwing program, within our throwing program, there's a lot of specific things that we do to address specific problems. So for example, if you're looking at arm action, the way we use our arm, for me, that's the most important. I mean, there is ground force within that, the whole deal of throwing a ball, but if you don't have the proper arm action and you're not in the right position, you're not going to be able to deliver that ball. So I place a lot of emphasis on arm action, ground force too, the way we and that's another part of the thing, the way I push off my back foot, how my weight transfers from my back to the front, how I use my front leg to extend and push all that energy that I've acquired up through my core and through my shoulder. So that's the second most important for me. And you know, there's also the preparation, okay, the strength and conditioning before, you know, the dynamic warm up before practice, the way that the pitchers go through their drills, and also their after throwing drills and the running part of it. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that fall into the pitcher's practice. But for me, young throwers, I concentrate a lot on the young guys, your development guys. You know, I did it too. When I was in Italy, and I'm still in Italy, but when I was with a club team in Italy, I was with a club team for 12 years. So the same exact thing that you guys are running into up in Great Britain, I've run into in Italy. And, you know, it's sort of funny because, you know, every place that I've gone to, it's almost the same exact flaws in throwing. I see the same problems. And I think that if we address those problems with a proper throwing program, if we use a dynamic warm-up to be able to get them in the proper position before they start throwing, instead of just being cold and going out there and throwing and doing a 10, 15-minute warm-up. It's going to make them more athletic, and it's also going to allow them to be ready to throw. The throwing program that we have, I think, is fundamental. You're going to look at the throwing program and say, well, that's not exactly a throwing program per se. It's more of a program where we're teaching players to throw properly. And there's a big difference. Okay, there's a big difference in going out there and taking the ball and just start winging it than there is taking the ball and trying to throw it in the proper with the proper force application. And that's the whole thing about the injury thing too. When we start talking about force application and improper force application, well, improper force application is where we get hurt. Very simple. So me personally, I know I don't want a kid that comes out and plays for my club, okay, or plays for my national team, whatever, and leaves practice at the end of the day with a sore arm. I mean, it's just, you know, it drives me crazy because number one, the kid's not going to have fun if he has a sore arm when he leaves practice. So I try to make sure that our throwing program and everything that we do is geared towards a healthy player. Everything we do is geared toward player health. Once we do that, then we could talk about maybe a little bit a more deeper discussion about the fundamentals and whatnot. But the most important fundamental for me, obviously, is throwing, because we have one DH. So if I'm developing players for the Bristol club, then I need to have guys that can throw. Okay, you need special people to play short and center because they need certain characteristics. But every other position on that diamond, okay, we can create players. We really can. But they have to be able to throw. If they can't throw, Richard, we're done. I mean, you know, you have one DH on the club, right? And that's it. So everybody's fighting over one spot if we can't throw. So that's why when I work out, when we have a practice, I emphasize throwing for at least 10 or 15 minutes a day. Because the three things that I work on are the strength and conditioning, because I'm trying to create athletes. Second one is the throwing aspect, okay, the throwing fundamental. And the third one is hitting. Those are the three things that I really need. I can teach kids to play defense, catching a ground ball, just picking up a fungo, and teaching them the proper fundamentals. But if I can have my guys do those three things, being better athletes, being good throwers, and being able to swing the bat and swing the bat well, those three things in themselves is going to develop baseball in Great Britain and also all over Europe. So that's why I emphasize those things. But again, I'll give Chris my throwing program. I'll transfer that over. It's a pretty big file because there's video in there too, Richard. And then once you see the throwing program, I'll be very happy to answer whatever questions you have about it. Very happy.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bill, we've had a question come in on the chat from Hakeem. He wanted to know how flexibility and range of motion uniqueness of each individual limits or expands arm action.
That's a great question, a terrific question, because you know we've been talking about that lately. I talk a lot to our strength and conditioning guy, Chad Gravenhorst in South Africa. We work really closely together. He's a great guy, and he really knows his stuff. He's a scientist, and we're talking about. Getting to the question, we're talking about screening players, because sometimes when we look at range of motion, like you said, could be in the shoulder, could be in the hip, could be in the ankle. That's going to either allow or inhibit the player from doing or to be able to do what we're asking him to do. So, for example, if I tell him, okay, push off your back foot and get your arm in position, he's got to be able to do that physically, and that's where our strength and conditioning program comes into play, because if we can work that on a daily basis, we're going to get more flexibility. We're going to get more range of motion slowly, okay? So that range of motion, hypothetically, in 99% of the humans on this planet should be the same. You're going to have exceptions to the rule, but that range of motion should be the same. So there should be no inhibitions within the shoulder to allow you to throw properly. And if there is something that's actually physically a problem, then you're not going to be able to throw properly. But I doubt if that's going to ever be a problem. I've never seen a kid that couldn't throw because he didn't have the ability to move his arm in the right way. Okay.
Thanks, Bill. Another question from the chat from Travis Harfield. I'm a junior. I was wondering how long I should be throwing for. Should I be throwing every day for a certain amount of time? And I think this speaks to potentially overwork at the junior level as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, and I answer that question all the time by explaining something extremely important to young players. They have to. It really depends on the intensity. Okay, it's not about throwing. I'd like for a kid to throw on a daily basis, but the intensity has to be very low. Okay, you can't throw in a high intensity every single day, because then you're going to end up hurting yourself. So for me, our throwing program that we use with MLB, if we did that throwing program 5 days a week at a 50% intensity, then we're going to get a lot better when we need to raise that intensity during the game or when I'm throwing long toss. So for me, the intensity level is what we have to adjust. Okay. Of course, the number of throws are going to be important too. We don't want to overthrow, but again, the intensity level is what dictates. It dictates our health, number one, on the lower end of it, and it dictates velocity on the upper end of it. So if I have more intent when I'm throwing at the end of my long toss program, I'm throwing the last 5 balls as hard as I possibly can, then I'm going to increase velocity. Okay, simple. If you don't have intent to throw hard, you'll never increase velocity. But on the other hand, you can't overextend yourself by throwing too hard for too long with high intensity. So that's where we have to try to balance things out. We work on mechanics, 90% of the time, arm action, body action, everything right. And then that 10% of the time, we start to work on velo.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. One more from the chat, and then we'll go back to the people asking questions, at least for now. Do you have any suggestions for position players or even pitchers who have had an injury such as a torn bicep or a UCL? Are there any exercises that you would suggest to help them regain the strength? So assuming that they've gone through a surgical procedure or have taken care of the injury itself, are there any strength building exercises you might recommend?
I would, I would say that the best thing for them to do is to get a really good physio. I like to use the Jaeger bands. I like to use the driveline protocols. I don't know if people know about the driveline protocols, but they're very good. I use wrist weights too, but again, all these different things that we use, I use them with my players, and I'm personally there to work with them. I wouldn't tell any player to go and work on his own and develop his own protocols for rehab or for prehab. Okay, I think his best alternative would be to get in touch with a good physio, somebody that is familiar with baseball too. Okay, which, you know, cricket is pretty close. I mean, I work with the English under-19 national team on their throwing. Of course, pitching, bowling is a completely different deal, but the throwing aspect, which they don't do really well at, funny enough, you know, it's more based on hitting. But yeah, I would definitely talk to a physio that has some knowledge about baseball. And I'm sure you guys know some people that you could send them to. That would be my best bet. And then if he wants to talk about throwing and throwing loads, pitching loads afterwards, drop me a line on my email. I'll be happy to answer.
Absolutely. And if you do have questions on how we can help with resources, particularly in the UK, send an email to the info@BSUK email that's on the screen right now, and I can send that to the right person. So we can find some help for you if you do need help finding a physio, finding a recommendation as well. We have those resources. Any other questions? Feel free to just unmute and go ahead and ask. Looks like Paul has a question.
Hi, Bill. Paul Whitfield from Durban in South Africa.
Hey, Paul.
How are you?
Good, man. How you doing?
Good, not too bad. Chris, thanks for getting this out and allowing me to join in here.
Of course.
Just just something, Bill, that I've picked up over a number of years with coaching of youngsters and pitchers in particular, is a lot of them tend to, the mechanics are bad, so they throw across the line. In other words, they step across the line and then throw across their body, which then puts a lot of strain on the arm. So, you know, that may be a point as well with regards to the mechanics that the guys that have got younger pitchers need to concentrate quite a bit on, because I find that a lot with our young pitchers here, where they go across the line and they battle with location, they get sore arms because they're not actually using their hips and their body to actually help their arm. The second thing is, as well, is what you find a lot, what I've found a lot with youngsters, and particularly we've had it here with one of the youngsters here, you'll probably know him, Nathan Krobler.
Yes.
Where, you know, I tried to tell him that, you know, you do need to rest. Rest is just as important as throwing, especially when the season comes to an end. But a lot of youngsters don't tend to, they think the more you do, the better you're going to get. And subsequently, Nathan recently has had a problem with his shoulder, and purely through, I said to him, it's because he was overthrowing. And I think that's also a problem, is that the youngsters just, they don't want to rest. They don't believe they should rest, where I try and tell my pitchers that at the end of a season, once they've played their provincial tournament, they should take 6 weeks off and then come back and start pre-season again. So I don't know.
Absolutely. Agree 100%, Paul. And, you know, it's sort of funny. As to addressing the first thing about throwing across your body, we've been, you know, I see that a lot in young pitchers because they all go to their toes right away. And Chad and I have been talking about, we have a really good ground force presentation right now about how the lower half has to work. That sort of creates direction towards home plate. And it's really, really good. I mean, we've started to really develop this process and this concept, because we're seeing the same thing all the time. I mean, in Italy, in Europe, I'm seeing all these kids go onto their toes, and that's allowing them to go drift to their right side, okay, if they're right-handed throwers, and the consequence is they throw across their body. And then once, as you know, they block off their front side and they can't use their hips to go around and throw the ball, right? So they're throwing against themselves, so to speak. And the second part of your question about the rest, or your observation, absolutely. I mean, that's why we have the off season. The off season, you know, when I was at the Italian Academy, we divided up the off season into 4 phases. We had the off season 1, which was more weight training, work on mechanics, but not throwing, doing towel drills, for example, or throwing short, working on our strength and conditioning, prehabbing, getting our arms strong again after a long season. Then we'd have off season 2, where we'd start to transfer that strength phase into power, okay, and speed. 3 is going to be preseason, and 4 is going to be maintenance, which is in season. So yeah, that first piece right there, our first piece went for 3 months. So we would go from September or mid-September till mid-December and not really pick up the ball much, because we needed to give ourselves a break, like you said, Paul. And the second thing is we start to build more strength. You have to build strength. That's why our kids in non-baseball playing countries, we need to develop that strength, because we're going to be behind the 8 ball, where the American guys are over there, or the Japanese guys or the South American guys are over there working out. They got great, huge bodies. We have to develop that athleticism that we don't put enough emphasis on, to be honest with you. But those are 2 great observations, really good observations.
I wanted to add something on that's less from a coaching perspective, but more from a media perspective. I grew up in Boston, so one of the things that I got when they signed Daisuke Matsuzaka was the stories about how he threw 210 pitches and then went out the next day and threw 150, and oh, what a legend, he's the greatest ever. No, there are never reports and there's never media about the guys who went out and did their training properly. It's always these exceptions to the rule. And I think reinforcing that from a standpoint to the players is almost as important as getting the training right. Obviously, you want them to get into a good training program, as Bill outlined, that is not just throwing, but involves strength and conditioning. But the way that baseball is portrayed in the media and is discussed, especially at a professional level, doesn't always match up with the expectations and the realities for a young person playing.
Absolutely. And, you know, like I said, it's the problem we have is exactly what you said. That's why the northern, you know, up north, kids, we have a tendency to develop more pitching up north than we do in the southern part of the United States, just because of that factor. You know, you get the snow and bad weather. People have to work out, okay, in the gym instead of being able to throw and play games. So to address, you know, address your point, that's our biggest problem right now in baseball in the States, is because people are playing in these travel ball leagues 12 months a year where possible. And it's just completely burning the kids out, both mentally and physically. So yeah, that's a great point. And it is a huge problem.
Okay, I think this will be our last question, but it's a very good one. It's on the chat and comes from David. What are your thoughts on returning to throwing and training after this lockdown? And I think that's going to be that's the $64,000 question here, isn't it? Is how do you come back from this lockdown, especially when teams were ramping up and all of a sudden everything stopped and there may be a short amount of time to salvage a season? Anything that you would suggest there?
I think that we're going to see a lot of problems with the big league clubs when they come back, because of not all the pitchers are continuing to work like they should work, I'm sure. And in the past, we've seen more Tommy John surgeries in March than we have in July or August. So that's going to be a problem for sure. So me personally, if I were, you know, I coach kids in Italy now, even outside. And if I were a player right now and I was going to start the season in mid-July, I'd be working my butt off right now, physically, and also starting my throwing program. Because if we can have our throwing program and our arm in good enough shape to be able to at least go on the mound for one inning the first time after a first week of practice, then we're definitely going to be way ahead of the curve.
Fantastic. I need to correct what I put in the chat, Bill's email, because I missed an H. Thank you to Paul Vernon for pointing that out. It is hard to type and present at the same time. At least I'm not running social media for a team. I've done that before too. Once again, a huge thank you, Bill, for spending the time and really teaching us all. I don't think anyone's going to come away from this without learning something, to be quite honest. This was a fantastic presentation, so thank you so much, especially doing it from the US. If there are any questions that people have, they can email, again, info@bsuk.com, or Bill's email, which is down in the chat. And likewise, Bill has very generously offered to review video. So if you'd like to send that to him, please feel free to do so in the upcoming weeks, months, especially as we get back to training. Now it's time for my cheap plug, because I do work for BSUK. We are reopening up Farnham Park this weekend for limited one-on-one training sessions where we will provide a coach. We are also doing field hires, and we are letting people rent out not only our batting cage, but our pitching machines. It's a baseball pitching machine as well. If you're interested in that, all the information's on BSUK's social media. We will also be looking to do a couple more webinars in the upcoming weeks. Hopefully fewer, though, because the fewer webinars we're doing, the more on-field action there is. So as much as we love doing the webinars and much as we're learning so much from the webinars, we'd really like to be playing the games instead. So if you have any suggestions for webinars as well, feel free to email them to info@bsuk. Happy to take suggestions and find coaches as we can. And Bill, any final words, final wisdom that you can impart upon us?
No, I'll be really happy to thank you, Chris, for allowing me to do this. Number one, and number two is nobody's disturbing me if they send me an email, and just bear with me. I'll get back with you as soon as I can, but I'm really, really happy to. It helps me to evaluate video and something new. It keeps me a little bit busy too. So I'm more than happy to help. And as I said, I'll send you the MLB throwing program, and you can post that on the website.
Mm-hmm. And that will be up on our website, baseballsoftballuk.com/game ready tomorrow. We'll also put it out on our social media. So that will be available for any which way you can think of getting it, except for carrier pigeon. I haven't figured that one out yet. That's it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bill, thank you once again for your time and wisdom. And hopefully we will be on the field soon. But if not, hopefully we will see you for one of our next webinars. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Chris.
Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.